Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smuga-Otto, author of the humorous fantasy series Boy Bands and Dragons. The first book, our comeback tour Slaying Monsters, will be released this year by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast. Hey, everybody.
Welcome to Words to Write By.
Welcome to Words to Write By. If you are now just joining us today, we are on stage 8 of The Ordeal. Now, if that is, what the heck is The Ordeal and what were the steps before it, you should go to our website and go to our study guide. We have a Hero's Journey study guide you can go to, and it gives you a list of all the steps in the hero's journey, along with examples from the book, The Hobbit. Before we begin, there's a few things we would like to mention. One, we have a process group every single week at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on Meetup. You can go to Meetup and you look up Words to Write By Podcast, or you can go to our website, words-to-write-by-podcast.com, and there's a poster. You just click on it, and it will take you to our process group, which is free.
Our process group is just a chance for writers to get together and talk about stuff, not to critique each other's writing, but just to talk about where we're at, problems we're having, good things that have happened to us, bad things that have happened to us. Basically, a good chance to talk to somebody that isn't a relative and who's tired of listening to you talk about your writing stuff.
It's kind of like a support group.
Yeah, it's a fun time.
Also, we happen to have a tip jar on our website, words-to-write-by-podcast.com. There are snark notes there. You can go and check out all of the notes for the episode. If you would like, notes on what we talked about and examples.
Renee puts in some really great links. If nothing else, you can go to Snark Notes and see what crazy video she's linked to make a snarky comment about something.
Yeah. Just a little hint. One of the previous episodes just recently I finished, I put some Beavis and Butthead in there. Oh, yeah. So you can check those out. They are snarky. Definitely snarky. So, Kim, you sent me some fun text messages.
Yes. This last weekend, I went to San Diego. It was a fun trip, but it was actually a work trip because I am researching some scenes for my next book. My current book is out on Amazon. It's a series called Boy Bands and Dragons. And in this next book, they're going to start off fighting a sea monster. So I was riding around in some of the ships at the Maritime Museum there, getting a feel for what it's like to be on an old style ship.
A sea monster.
Yeah.
Is it a kraken?
Well, you have to read the book and find out.
Dang it. Okay. Well. Anyway, you got to read the first book first.
That's true.
So go out and get it. It's during Christmas time. If your friend or your loved one likes boy bands and or Dungeons and Dragons.
Or they just want a fun fantasy where it's not too dark and grim.
Right. It's a lot of fun.
It's kind of light and fun fantasy, but it still follows in certain ways the hero's journey, which is what we are talking about here. And we are talking about Stage 8, The Ordeal.
The Ordeal. Which, reading this chapter was quite
the ordeal.
I don't know if it's as bad as the previous chapter, but it's really close.
He kind of writes in a stream of consciousness. Kind of like, oh, I'll talk about this. Oh, I'll talk about this. The chapter has subheadings. It has 29 subheadings.
For this one chapter, you counted them?
Yes.
Holy crap.
And we're going to go through all of them, but not in depth, only if they deserve it.
That's a lot that don't deserve it. That's just going to say. Also, it's very confusing because like in the last chapter, what confused me a lot is he'd have a subheading, but it's something he already talked about. It was just said in other words, so I got really confused. He did that here too, so that's another reason to read the snark notes because I organize it for you.
So the last main episode we had talked about the previous stage, which was approaching the cave. Then we got the ordeal, which is not actually in the cave, but maybe it's in the cave. But what he says about the ordeal is that it is facing the greatest challenge and the most fearsome foe.
So this is in the cave. It has to be. It doesn't have to be a literal cave.
No.
It's the place where the villain is, usually.
Yeah, and another description he had was that the ordeal is it's the fight that's the driving force of your hero's narrative. It's the thing that you know from the beginning when you pick it up that there's going to be this thing.
Like in The Hobbit, we know it's Smaug. Smaug has taken over the mountain.
From the very beginning, they say, we're going to go to the dragon's cave and steal the gold.
Yes.
So there's a whole bunch of other adventures and elves and, golems and things like that. But in the end, we're waiting for the showdown with the dragon. That is the ordeal.
Yes.
That's what we paid my money for.
Yes, exactly. So in story arc terms, it is the main event at the end of Act 2.
Right.
Which is still very weird to me because I would imagine the ordeal would be the end of Act 3. But it's not. And it does make some sense when he breaks it down.
Yeah, we'll get to that. First subheading is Death and Rebirth.
And then in bold, he says, heroes must die so that they can be reborn. Okay.
Again, we have to be metaphorical death here, too, because most stories don't have the hero actually dying.
Right. So a lot of this, I feel, comes from movies. The one that popped into my head right away was Neo from The Matrix. Mm-hmm. He literally dies.
Right.
But then he comes back. Mm-hmm. But yes, it could be, and most oftentimes will probably be a metaphorical death of some kind.
My take on it was that the heroes need to fail before they succeed. There needs to be a darkest moment so that we feel the success more.
Yeah. He says they have passed the main test of being a hero by cheating death. So they have to be at their lowest point and to overcome it, or they don't earn the title of hero.
Definitely. We'll be talking more about death in later subheadings because
comes back.
It does.
Again and again. Then there's the change, which I think that actually does come in a lot of books. The hero is transformed from the process of dying and coming back.
Or the process of almost failing or failing and coming back.
Right. Or the process of the death of a friendship or a loved one or something that was core to the storyline.
What I got out of this is that there has to be an internal change for the better in the main character. It's not just that they go and they fight and they win, that there's something in them that shifts.
Yes.
For me, I could read one hero's journey story and just be fine for the rest of my life. What makes them interesting is the emotional connection I feel to the character. And I feel more of an emotional connection if I see the person changing.
Right. I'm trying to think of an example that's not movies, but Neo comes back. Matrix really follows this to the T. Neo dies, he comes back, and it is both an internal and external shift. Not only does he know Kung Fu way better than Mr. Anderson and kicks his ass, but he was able to do that because he changed his mind about the Matrix. He stopped kind of believing it and seeing for the illusion that it was. And dying is what did it, where, wait, I'm not really dead.
Right.
So that did it. I'm trying to think of a story. I do remember a book. So I was reading this book for our book club a while ago. It was really good. It was called Children of Time. It's a novel by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I'm not trying to spoil the plot or anything.
Okay.
But it's sci-fi. Another planet is involved. And during the ordeal, part of the problem is that there are sentient creatures that are creatures that we would normally be scared of. Spiders. And the humans and the spiders meet. And it's like, oh shit, right? They're going to be enemies. So immediately there's like this visceral, oh my God, these things are going to kill us. And it takes the hero or one of the heroes, they have to shift their mind in order to see what's actually at stake here. Is it really these spiders are going to murder us, or is something else happening? Mm-hmm. Or is it someone else that's trying to murder us and it's not the obvious villain in front of me? They had to shift their mindset in order for things to work. And that is all I'm going to say. It doesn't spoil anything. You will love it, dear reader, if you read it.
I'm going to say probably those realizations come in a very exciting and tense moment.
Under duress. Oh. Certainly under duress. Yes, yes. It was very good ending. That book was really, really good.
So next section, the crisis, not the climax. And I want to say that, first of all, I think this is a very important section. And I am not happy at all on how he wrote it because I didn't get anything out of it. Sometimes if I have someone explain something poorly to me, I get so frustrated that I'm determined to actually figure it out. And so in that way, this spurred me on. But the first thing that pissed me off about this is he said, the ordeal is a major nerve ganglion. Ganglion, yes. The thing is, I've done biology. And I'm like, what is that exactly and all that? First of all, when you pick an analogy, it should be something that actually helps the reader understand things better. And just a question, does that term help you understand better what the crisis is?
No, not at all. It had something to do with the dinosaur's tail, though, which also confused me. So,
first of all, you almost never refer to it in the singular because there's a whole bunch of them. Because it's not like you have one tiny set of nerves that do things nearby. There are multiple ones.
Wait. What's a ganglion then?
A ganglia is basically when one neuron connects to the other with all their little, their connectors, so you can transmit messages through.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I think what he thought it was is a whole bunch of neurons connecting to one neuron and then going out to a whole bunch of other neurons. And it's not like that. It's much more like you have multiple connections, but you don't have multiple neurons. It's a really bad analogy, and it got me ticked off. And he was trying to use it to illustrate the idea that the ordeal is the crisis, not the climax of the book. Once I got the analogy out of the way and actually looked at what he's talking about, I still didn't understand it.
Yeah. He says there's a nerve center further down near the end of the story, like the brain at the base of a dinosaur's tail. Why would there be a brain at the base of a dinosaur's tail? That just confused me.
So a neuron, like in your fingers, it actually extends all the way up. It's got this little connector. They're really, really long cells. A dinosaur was so freaking long that the neuron would not transmit the information fast enough to get to the brain. So it had like this supplementary section that took care of certain responses.
Oh, like a pit stop.
Yeah, like for reflexes and stuff like that.
Okay, so it was like a pit stop for things to go quickly.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. I am not a scientist. Kim is. I majored in creative writing.
You didn't go through a dinosaur stage when you were in kindergarten?
No, dinosaurs are cool.
Right.
But
you weren't one of those kids just sucked up the information about dinosaurs and repeated facts to everybody around you?
I actually don't remember pretty much anything I learned specifically until high school.
Well, on the good note, the science of dinosaurs has changed radically over the years. Anything you would have learned when you were a kindergartner was probably be defunct by now anyway. So,
it worked out. It worked out. Well, I mean, I'm still sad about Pluto, but we'll let that go. So he does say the ordeal is usually the central event of the story or the main event of the second act, which is interesting because I would have thought that the central event of the story would take care of itself at the end of Act 3, which would be the climax, but it's not.
Yeah.
Do you agree with this?
Here's the thing. Using the intent behind his analogy, I got the idea that you have a whole bunch of connections coming in, a whole bunch of plot lines you've been setting up that come together at the crisis. And then from there, a whole bunch of different results come out of it. So it's this like point where everything comes together and then you deal with all the results that come around afterwards, as opposed to the climax where you get to the climax and it finishes the story for more or less. Like then everything gets tied up.
So this is a catalyst.
Well, I mean, again, catalyst is a
bad word too. Okay, I should not use. It's funny because a lot of these words I don't think about in terms of science. They're just part of a vocabulary. You know, I don't think of the science source of them. Let's think of a better analogy.
So I went looking and I found a piece where someone was talking about the 5-point structure that they used. And in the 5-point structure,
what are you talking about? 5-point structure.
That's with your inciting incident, and
so it's not a 3-act. This is not 3-act structure. It is.
It's more like a framework to tell your story. So you're not thinking about an act. You're thinking about the inciting incident and a bunch of other stuff. But what she said was that the crisis is the choice point. Everything leads up to that moment, and then we see what the hero does, and that determines everything further on.
So I'm really curious because I've never heard of this. 5-act?
No, 5-point structure.
Point story structure?
Yeah.
This is going into the show notes, by the way, dear listener. Oh, there's a lot of screenwriting things. Well, here is an image. The image says, Act 1, exposition, with the inciting moment that leads to Act 2, which is the rising action, which leads to the complication. Then we get to Act 3, which is the climax. And then we go back down the triangle to the reversal, to Act 4, the falling action, the final suspense, and Act 5 is the denouement. Interesting.
So if you think about it as a choice, it's everything leading up to this incredibly tense moment. All your plot threads are coming together here. And then it's time for the hero to do something. And what they do is the ordeal. And then what comes out is everything else that moves the story from that point. Does that make sense?
Well, we have other examples here. We've read other books, and we read The Last Unicorn for the beginning of this book to compare. And this is the point at which Prince Lur decides to die.
If you think of the unicorn as the main character, as the hero.
Oh, that's true.
In Last Unicorn, it's when she confronts the bull.
And she does that. The choice she makes is when she sees Prince Lur essentially commit suicide.
Right. So
by
we
running
see some death, and she comes in, and we'll talk about some of that. But like you said, she makes that choice. She
does.
sees that, and she acts. And we've set up the story of The Last Unicorn all the way along that she's going to find the Red Bull, and she'll have to confront the Red Bull.
Yes.
So that's what makes this the crisis or the ordeal, but not necessarily the climax.
Okay. So was that the climax when she did that?
I think we often use the term climax to be the most exciting part of the story.
But it's not. It is?
This is a different interpretation of what the climax is. It's more maybe everything coming together for the ending of the story.
So in The Matrix, what was the climax? Was it him flying into the sky at the end?
Yeah, and all the copies and all the superpowers and stuff like that.
Okay.
Maybe the climax is the point where you go, booyah!
All right. All right.
The rah-rah, In music, the climax is the really loud bit at the very end.
I'm still a little confused, but that's okay. I'm kind of like crisscrossing the climax with the crisis.
At this point, I'm just going to get myself to understand the crisis, and I'll worry about the climax when we get to that mess of the book.
Okay. It's hard to do that because I'm a worrier, but I understand. So let's move on. We've got the next one, right?
So the next question is, where do you put the ordeal, the crisis, the placement of the ordeal? This actually had some sense. It had graphs and it had some ideas. What did you get out of this?
Confusion. He's got two graphs. I also have a graph on the study guide, and it's 3 mountains, right? Because there were 3 acts. But now he's got one that's got 1, 2, 3, 4 acts. And he's got Act 1, Act 2A, then there's this midpoint ordeal, then Act 2B, and then Act 3, and then the denouement. So
I think he purposely is splitting Act 2 in the middle, because
why?
The first idea is that you put the crisis in the center of the book, in the middle of Act 2.
Okay.
And this kind of structure is when everything builds up to a moment, and then there's a whole bunch of fallout, and maybe at that point, the heroes don't win the big fight, and they go their separate ways. Or they almost win, but the last minute the bad guy still gets the special thing and gets away.
Okay.
So at that point in your story, you need some time to regroup, because you just thrown everything apart. And now you got to pull them back together to get to the climax. You've seen stories that have that sort of structure, right?
Superhero stories.
Yeah, in the Avengers.
Yeah.
It all falls apart, and then they have to come back together and have the actual duke it out.
And the Spider-Man, one with the 3 Spider-Mans. Mm-hmm. They all worked together, but they failed.
Right.
And then they had to try it again.
Right. One of the cool things about this is the crisis is this incredibly energetic, engaging moment that you want to read about, and you're putting it closer to the beginning of the book, so the reader gets it faster.
Okay, wait. So I guess I'm confused. The problem with these charts is it makes it look like each act has the same amount of pages attached to it, the same amount of words, and it doesn't, because Act 3 can be very, very, very short.
Right. With the first diagram, you do basically see one peak, and that's probably at the point at the end of Act 1 where they have the first threshold. So that's a high energy point. And then it builds in the second act to the climax that happens in the middle. And then, everything falls apart and you have to put it back together. And again, you build again to the third peak.
Okay.
If you don't pay attention to exactly when things are happening, but you look at that overall structure, makes sense?
So he wants the death and rebirth moment, or the ordeal itself. He wants that in the middle of Act 2, in the central crisis version.
Right. So in the delayed crisis, he references the golden mean, which is
Another science thing that pisses you off?
it's very useful in photography. Like there are certain compositions. When you're taking photographs, if you take a photograph of a person and you make sure that they're in a specific position, it's going to be a very pleasing photograph. And if you put them in some other place, it's like, well, that's kind of like weirdly off balance.
That sounds like a good analogy.
Right. But he's actually claiming that it works, that there's a very specific point where you put, if you put your delayed crisis at 2/3 to 3/4 through the book, that it will have this magical quality of symmetry and all those things that work for visuals, but I don't think necessarily work for books. And also 2/3 to 3/4 is a fairly large range, and you actually get different ratios between the two of those. So again, it's a lot of hand waving and claiming that it's the golden mean, when the golden mean actually does mean a very specific position.
So I'm just going to send a warning out to teachers out there. If you are a teacher and you are teaching creative writing, do not teach this book. Do not do it. You will get, I'm already like, sometimes I look at books like this and I think, okay, if I turned this into a test, because your brain can't stop doing that after you taught for 10 years. And, you look at subheadings, you look at the main ideas, you look at things, you ask, okay, at what point can I have a student analyze a story or something? You would be throwing the student under the bus. It is not fair. Like, I would feel like this is a not fair chapter to test anybody on, because it's so confusing.
Renee, you're assuming that the students actually read the textbook?
Stop it! My husband said the same thing.
The truth hurts. Anyway, the delay crisis idea is that you put the crisis at the end of Act 2. So you're building and building and building and building to get to that final crisis. And then very soon after that, you hit the climax. So you don't really have much space in between. This would be something where, like, they're on a journey and they fight the monsters at the gate, and then they're into the castle with the final. That's a bad analogy, but it's very close. You don't have time to regroup. You don't have time to learn new stuff or gain new tools. You're like in the moment and you're just pushing forward. I think Murderbot kind of works on this.
Oh, yeah.
When I was trying to figure out how to write a story, I was like, well, let's see how Martha Wells does it. And what she does is that usually about 1/4 to at most a half, she suddenly starts putting a bunch of battle and action in, and she just never lets up. You're just going and going and going, and it gets more and more intense. And then you finish the book. So this is kind of more that idea.
Yeah. So just to let you know, he's giving you a choice here. You can either do the central crisis, where the crisis ends up in the middle of the story, or you can do the delayed crisis, where the ordeal ends up at the end of Act 2.
I would like to point out one thing that these two sections do not have, which would be pretty damn useful. An example. Like, I would even take an old Western at this point. He does not give a single book or movie example.
Oh, but wait, Kim, he gives us the Webster's definition of crisis. Is that not helpful?
If it was a movie, it'd be one thing. But, like, there's nothing I could say, oh, this is like such and such, because he doesn't even mention it.
Yeah. There are no examples.
No Wizard of Oz.
No Wizard of
No Beverly Hills Cop. No Master and Commander. It's just
same old, same old. No, I understand it is very confusing, which is why snark notes are so important, dear listener, because I will give you an example. I'll find one. I promise.
a good one.
A good one.
Next section.
Points of tension.
Points of tension. What did you get out of this one?
I wrote a couple notes, and that's about it.
What did you write?
I wrote this one quote. He says, Act 2 is an hour-long chunk of your movie or 100 pages of your novel. It needs some kind of structure to hold it in tension. Then he doesn't really tell me what that structure is really. But later on, I found he said that everything in the trip has been leading up to this moment, and everything after it will just be going home. There may be even greater adventures to come. The final moments of a trip may be the most exciting and memorable, but every journey seems to have a center, a bottom or a peak, somewhere near the middle. And that confused me a lot because The trip has been leading up to this moment, and ever after it will be going home. They're just going home. Nobody just goes home at the middle of the book. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. I kind of ignored a lot of what he said. My note was, basically, you need a crisis in the middle to keep the readers engaged. As witnessed by Kaiju Preservation Society and Renee, at a certain point, your readers are bored if it's just one little adventure after another little adventure. You actually want to see the stakes raised. You want a tense moment. You want to wonder how it's going to be. And the cool thing about the crisis is you don't know how it's going to end up. You've got so much more of the book. Like, all sorts of stuff could happen, especially if it appears that the hero dies. The crisis is kind of what tightens the whole story.
Right.
If you don't have a crisis in that second act, it just kind of starts sagging and going along, and just your audience loses focus.
Yeah. Yeah. Then he moves on to witness to sacrifice.
Yeah, and I think now we've gone past, if I were organizing this book, I would start off with what is the crisis? And I have several of these early points talking about what the crisis is and how it works and how it affects your book. And then I have the whole placement, like where do you put it? And then I would have a final section where I said, well, how do you make it work? Here's some examples of how to make it work. And I took most of the following points as kind of examples of this is one way to make your crisis work. Engage your audience.
Well, give us one.
And the first one is witness to sacrifice. And that means you can have somebody outside of the hero seeing them die or appear to die. And that can give more tension, because if you don't actually want them dead, but you just want them off camera for a moment, and you want to be a little bit away from them, you can have someone else see something really bad happen, and that will engage your readers.
Right. Make them think that they have died.
This is also the point where he decides to use the exact same Star Wars example for every single of these techniques.
Yeah.
And this one he says, the point where R2-D2 and 3CPO think the humans have died in the
trash compactor.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I wrote a craft book, I promise you, dear listener, that I would never, ever use Star Wars or Harry Potter or Hunger Games or The Wizard of Oz, especially. Never, ever, ever. I'm sick and tired of Star Wars. I'm just generally sick and tired of Star Wars.
Which is too bad, because it was such a cool thing we were growing up. It was so special.
I loved the original 3.
Yeah.
And I don't even consider the other one Star Wars. Disney has turned it into a kinder, nicer world, when I want the world where Han shot first. That's the world that I grew up with, and that's the only one I like.
Not to defend Disney, but you have to remember that the Anakin series was also Lucas.
I don't consider that
right,
Star
but I'm
Wars.
saying it started even then.
Well, no, it started before then, when they did the remastered versions in the 90s of the original 3, and they made it so that Han didn't shoot first. That was the beginning of the end for Star Wars.
Next example is A Taste of Death.
A Taste of Death, which makes no sense, because didn't they already die and come back?
Another Star Wars example, the exact same scene.
So either you need your hero to have a taste of death, or they actually die, or they metaphorically die. I guess you get to choose among them.
Maybe this is they have to fail in some way that they almost die, so they appreciate being alive.
So this death and rebirth movement, it's kind of okay, you can have the gluten-free version, or you can have the vegan version, or you could have, all the meat and dairy version.
That analogy works for me.
Oh my God, an analogy that works for Kim.
That makes more sense,
Okay, if I write a craft book and I talk about this, I'm going to use that.
Okay, and then we get to the elasticity of emotions. Now, this basically means if something bad happens and something good happens, we feel even better.
Did you like his analogy about the basketball underwater and it just pops back up?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the funny thing is that if you wanted something with neuroscience behind it, this definitely has neuroscience behind it. There's a whole areas of study that focus on when you lose something and you gain it back, how much better you feel.
Right.
Did he use the term roller coaster? In my mind, it's like a roller coaster. It's you get up to the top and you get that anxiety, and that makes the going down all the better.
Did you ever have a car that didn't work, Kim?
No.
Okay. So this reminds me of when I was younger and I had these cars that would just break down, right? And abandon me on the side of the road, or, whatever. And There would come points where the car was going to break down or it did break down and someone saved you. They like fixed something in your car or dad loaned you $100 and you were able to get the car started again and life moved on. And to me, that is real. You are in a down point. You are in a part of crisis where you're like, oh shit, I'm screwed. I can't get to work. I can't do this or whatever. All these things are horrible. And then you get saved and it's elation. Like your brain's like, I can do anything.
You know, what reminds me personally is when I get a migraine, and I don't get very bad migraines, but I still get migraines. And like they're nasty headaches. And there's this medicine that I take. It's aspirin plus caffeine. And for some reason, it makes the migraine go away. It works within like 20 minutes. Wow. So I go from having this horrible headache and then suddenly it lightens up and I feel so good. Like I feel great because I was feeling so crappy beforehand.
Yeah, that's what the elasticity of emotion is.
This is important because sometimes you get books where you don't do really nasty things to your characters. You don't give them that low moment. Often people like characters to be very competent, and they will actually say, well, I didn't like, that he failed here or he made these horrible mistakes. I just wanted my hero to do everything right because he was a good person, he was smart, and he had all these talents. And this is the counterexample, which is that your audience won't really appreciate the success of the hero unless they first have that bad feeling when things aren't going well.
Yes. We have to be very cruel as writers to our characters. He says, emotions depressed by the presence of death can rebound in an instant to a higher state than ever before. The ordeal is one of the deepest depressions, quote unquote, in a story and therefore leads to one of its highest peaks. So you really want to drive home that the character, the hero, is probably dead, only to bring them back. But you have to make it believable.
And that segues to a whole bunch more of death. We have the hero appears to die. Again, the trash compactor scene.
He just does a whole analysis of Star Wars. Again, that one scene. There was this funny part where he's like, the hero, for me, was truly in the belly of the whale, inaccessible, effectively dead. With the hero dead, who was I in this movie? What was my point of view? My emotions, like the basketball held under the water, were depressed.
Yeah, and then he disses Princess Leia.
He totally disses Princess Leia. If you have seen the trash compactor scene, put yourself there. You are watching the trash compactor scene in A New Hope Star Wars. He says, I remember seeing a preview screening of Star Wars on the Fox lot and being completely taken in by the critical few seconds of the scene. I invested something of myself in Luke Skywalker, and when he appeared to be dead, I instantly became a disembodied presence in the screen. I began flitting from surviving character to character, wondering who I could identify with. Would I ride through the rest of the story as the spoiled Princess Leia, the selfish opportunist Han Solo, or the beastly Wookiee? I didn't feel comfortable in any of their skins. In these few seconds, I experienced something like panic. The hero for me was truly in the belly of a whale. Blah, blah, blah. Screw you, Vogler. Princess Leia's a badass. She got freaking tortured.
Yeah, she was the one person that was actually helping the rebellion. I mean, the other guys were along for the ride.
I know. She sent that hologram to Obi-Wan Kenobi in a droid under fire. Okay, there's blasters going off. Her ship's about to get taken over. She sees her planet freaking explode.
If she was a male character, he probably wouldn't call her selfish.
Well, he did say Han was selfish.
Han was selfish.
Right, but spoiled?
Yeah.
A spoiled princess?
Yeah. Wouldn't have said that if she was male.
No. Imagine calling Han spoiled.
Right.
Yeah, that really bothers me.
I totally get that.
I'm really angry at that. So, no, Princess Leia is a badass.
Anyway, so then you could have the hero witness death. And again, we go back to the droids. Then we also have the hero causes death, which I think would definitely be an internal change for the character. Like sometimes the crisis is the first time the main character has to kill someone to survive.
Right. It's interesting because he uses this trash compactor scene, I guess, for the metaphorical death, but I didn't consider that the crisis. If it's the crisis in Act 2, it was Obi-Wan dying.
Right. The fight with Darth Vader.
Yeah, that was the crisis. So yeah. I'm kind of confused why this is the crisis.
Obviously, he was very moved by this scene, so he must be right, and that's the most important part of the.
He's moved in a very weird way.
So then we move on to facing the shadow. So one thing that your crisis can have is you get the biggest fight against the hero's opponents, the shadow. The concept of the shadow is not just the bad guy, but it's the bad guy that is a reflection of all your hero's good traits in a bad way. There's a yin and a yang version.
So it's designing a villain here.
Yeah, or just naturally it falls into that.
Okay.
The best villains have some aspects of the hero twisted.
Yeah. Well, I wrote Batman and Joker.
Yeah, exactly. So the crisis is the point where your hero faces his villain, his arch nemesis.
It's interesting when you think of like a series where the villain changes. Like you defeat the villain and then you get a second book deal or third book deal and you have to change the villain because the villain's dead now. So you got to need a new one.
Most writers have something in the back of their mind for how they're going to go. Maybe it's not a very good idea, but they have some idea. The next section was demonization, and I wrote totally lost here.
Yeah. He talked about projection, demonizing other people. So I'm not sure. The form of projection is called demonization. People in emotional crisis will sometimes project all of their problems in a certain area onto another person or group who become the symbol of everything they hate and fear in themselves. Okay, thank you. But what's the point? Sometimes we need this projection and polarization in order to see an issue clearly. So I thought of, when I taught my social science fiction literature course, I assigned an article. I think the author's name was Jacober, called The Continuum of Meaning. And in it, they talk about how social science fiction provides this opportunity for to shock us out of the things that we're desensitized to so that we can actually see the injustice. And to me, I'm giving Vogler a bone here. I'm assuming that's something he was talking about. So during that unit, when I teach that article, I teach the movie District 9. It is a perfect example of shocking you out of a desensitized moment. If you've seen the movie, you know that there's aliens in a refugee camp. You may not realize that that refugee camp was real. That wasn't actually a set. And you see how humans are treating and torturing these poor aliens when that's just a metaphor for how we treat other people and other refugees. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear. We're so desensitized to seeing other people get beaten and treated poorly and coming up with reasons. Well, maybe they did. What did they do? You know, all sorts of stuff when it's like, no, abuse is abuse. So to throw him a bone, I think that what he's saying. Did that help?
I mean, that's a good bit of writing advice. I'm not sure how it actually clicks into this particular moment. And the next section, we go on to death of a villain. So if you kill off your villain, like you were saying, then you have to have another villain further on. Mm-hmm. Somebody a bit more. And you can't make him too easy. So there has to be some kind of connection, like, you know, kill this person, his brother comes after you, or something like that.
But in The Hobbit, it was Smaug. But after Smaug died, it just caused a chain reaction.
Right.
That created the Five Army War.
Or you can have your villain escape the fight. Actually, that's one of the classic ones. I mean, you watch a movie and you think you've killed the villain and then he comes out again.
Yeah, the villain escapes.
That works so well.
Yeah.
You're willing to forgive any amount of like, well, I thought he was dead. And you just let it go because it's so enjoyable.
And you can have the metaphorical death in there.
Yeah.
Because the villain, quote unquote, kind of kills the spirit of the hero.
Death doesn't have to be the hero. I mean, you can have the death of somebody else. And here you think the villain's dying. Then we get villains are the heroes of their own stories, which he's covered before.
Okay, yeah. Then there's how heroes cheat death.
Okay, so
it's when the hero's expected to die, and they don't.
Using the mentor's gifts or something gained from a earlier adventure, which ties everything in. Like you have some extra plot point that's been hanging around, and suddenly there it is, and it's useful, and that's how you cheat death.
Or you put a pile of bones at the base of the castle to get the maiden, and your hero is the one that survives. So they cheated the death that all the others experienced.
Okay. Then we have a side, since we are
Ariadne's thread. I skimmed it.
This was getting really long at this point.
Can we just skip it?
So, yeah, we can skip it. I mean, I think it means that you can also have an emotional attachment that causes the hero to cheat death. Helped out this one person, and suddenly they're back again or whatever. And then we move into a whole thing called the Supreme Ordeal, which I think is him trying to work
Not the
out.
crisis of the heart?
Well, yes, but the crisis of the heart is the Supreme Ordeal. And I wrote, the Supreme Ordeal with fries and a drink.
That's going in the show note.
I think he's trying to address love stories here.
I see. Yes, yes.
The crisis of the heart is the love scene where they either kiss or they break up. And that's definitely a moment where, again, this whole idea of a whole bunch of plot threads come together and a whole bunch of new plot threads are birthed from it based on what happens. So, like if they kiss, then that's going to change everything from that point. If they break up, that's going to change everything.
Crisis of the heart. That was in Lord of the Rings movies when Aragorn fell into the river.
How was the crisis of the heart?
Well, there's these flashbacks where he was thinking of his girlfriend, his elf girlfriend, and she kind of saved him, like his faith in her and not letting her go and all that other stuff.
Okay.
Saved him. And then when he came back, he made it clear to the princess of Rohan that he was not interested. Maybe that wasn't a very good example.
Well, I think it actually fits with the next one, the whole sacred marriage, which is another WTF section. This is more, no, let's cut that all out.
Yeah, screw it. If you're writing a romance, don't use this book. It's not going to help you very much.
The sacred marriage was, again, a bunch of hand-waving things. Whenever I see the word sacred marriage, I remember that when we were in Japan for the first time, we were looking around at various texts, and there was some marriage, like decorative marriage certificate that you could buy, which said, "We are getting sacred in marriage."
He does the whole animus thing again. He said animus.
This is one of those internal changes, and I was thinking like stories where like you had an adult that's saddled with some kid, and he's not a very good parent to the adult. And they're going along, and at a certain point, like he can let the kid just go and he go back to his decadent lifestyle, but at that point, suddenly he realizes, no, he is going to protect this kid. That is a crisis. That is an ordeal, and that's when it kicks in. That's why I got out of that.
Slogan.
Oh, yeah, or any of
The
those
movie
ones.
slogan, yeah.
Or, the video game one, too.
Oh, Last of Us.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Or Paper Moon. Like, it's recurrent. Like,
Yeah. Oh, it was in The Witcher, the first book.
there you go.
Hey! Oh, yeah. You get some very salty dude who hates everything, especially children,
Yeah.
and then you saddle him with a kid.
Best thing that ever happened to him.
Best thing that ever happened to him. All right.
Can we skip the balance section?
Please.
Okay. Then we get the love that kills, and where the hero is betrayed by lover. I'd like to point out this is not a romance story anymore. This is something else, because in romance stories that doesn't.
Right, we're boiling rabbits at this point.
Yeah.
If you have not seen that scene from that movie, it's not worth it. But if you want to see, what was it called again? Fatal Attraction?
Fatal Attraction.
Yes. It's a crisis of faith in the arena of love. Betrayal. You fall in love with a crazy person, essentially. We've all done it.
Going past here, we get the actually just going psycho. And here's what I took out of this, because he has a long explanation of what the going psycho is based on a Hitchcock movie, and it doesn't seem to follow any kind of hero's journey. And what I took was that since Hitchcock breaks all the rules of the hero's journey, but is such a cool director and makes such cool movies, there must be some hero's journey you can kind of weave into it, so you can kind of claim that, yes, that works for that too.
Sure.
Yeah, you want to be with the cool kids there.
Then we have, we're back to the real world of storytelling, facing the greatest fear.
Okay, that's a good central climax.
The ordeal can be defined as the moment of the hero facing his or her, I'm adding that, or them. For most people, to this is death, but in many stories, it's just whatever the hero is most afraid of. Facing up to a phobia, challenging a rival, or roughing out a storm or a political crisis, Indiana Jones inevitably comes face to face with what he fears most. Nazis. No, snakes. Snakes, sorry.
Or the person's afraid of heights or something all the way through and all the way through. And you know that the crisis is going to involve heights and them overcoming that fear.
Yep.
Standing up to a parent.
That was a good one. Generational trauma. Yeah.
Yeah. Like overcoming a bad relationship. Like that moment when you make the decision that you're not going to let this person control your life anymore.
Mm-hmm. I wrote down, Kronos and Zeus.
Yeah.
It's like that. There's that really cool picture.
Then we get youth versus age, which is just metaphorical parents.
More generational drama.
And finally, death of the ego.
Dun dun.
I wrote, hero becomes a god.
Worked for Neo. The old boundaries of the self have been transcended or annihilated. In some sense, the hero has become a god with the divine ability to soar above the normal limits of death and see the broader view of the connectedness of all things. It is totally Neo.
Yeah.
They must have read this book. Apotheosis.
Sure.
You over it? She's over it, dear listener.
Boy, but at this point, I just was patting myself on the back because I got to the end of the chapter.
It is, it's not as bad as the previous chapter, I don't think. But it's close. It's very confusing. He does go into the Wizard of Oz just a little bit, but it's back to his old hijinks where it's all in italics and he doesn't do the weird, creepy animus kind of.
I think we should skip over to our own example of Kaiju.
Yes.
Kaiju Preservation Society, written by John Scalzi, and we've been going through and mapping out the hero's journey based on it. Where do you think the crisis is in this book? Using some of the techniques we've heard listed here, where do you think you might point to it?
I think one of them was witnessing another character kill somebody, which they didn't actually kill, they just stunned. And then they had a few laughs about it.
You think that was the
That's
crisis?
like a metaphorical death.
Okay, so there's a metaphorical death. That'd be one thing.
Right. It's like, how serious are they going to take? How serious are they going to be? Right. They're serious about saving the kaiju. Are they willing to kill other people to save this kaiju? And it's clear that they're not.
Yeah. But was that a point where Jamie makes a choice? Because that's the other thing I was kind of looking at, was where in the book was Jamie making a critical choice or coming to a critical confrontation that from there everything was different afterwards?
It's hard to know because it's more like the team now. Like, it's not really him anymore. It's this whole team making these decisions. I don't know what he himself is doing anymore.
I mean, one thing you could say is when you get the shadow, which is obviously Rob,
The CEO.
who is very much a shadow of Jamie because he's selfish in all the ways that Jamie isn't selfish. Basically, any point where Jamie would do something good, Rob would do something slimy. So that would definitely qualify for the crisis. And then they'll get a point where Rob dies. So we get the death of the shadow.
Yeah. Well, he does kind of, I don't want to say he tricks Rob into monologuing, but he does a little bit.
Now they all do.
Yeah. They get Rob to monologue, even though Rob says that he has seen The Incredibles and he knows better. He does it anyway.
So yeah, there's that whole tricking, and there's the point where the pheromones actually do activate there. It's kind of off screen, but
it did happen. Okay, so in a previous episode, I was very disappointed when Kim told me that the oranges, there's a scene where they say if you smell oranges, you should run because that's the smell of a pheromone of when they're on murder mode. And it came back. It did come back. Mm-hmm. So I do want to give Scalzi the credit here. He says, around us, the lightest scent of oranges and citrus cut through the smell of pine and dirt.
okay. I missed that the first time, but careful reading, you found it.
It was in there. I was looking for it. So it does come back. The significant detail works.
So that could also be where we're talking about the crisis. And I was kind of thinking in movie terms. The crisis is that point where you are all in emotionally, where there's something cinematographically that your eyes just go, wow. And I realized if you're going to go it from a movie perspective, the crisis is going to be a point where suddenly Bella notices the humans and looks at them and gets in close. In this movie theater, you've got the entire kaiju coming at you, and you see those eyes looking at you because you're like from the perspective of Jamie and Rob looking at the kaiju. So I would say that cinematographically, that's the crisis. And in a way, Jamie does make a decision at that point. Like, he sees Bella as maybe not a intelligent creature, but a sentient creature, and he actually kind of talks to her a little bit.
So you're saying that the crisis is this scene.
I think the crisis could be a number of different points because it's a little bit more nebulous. This isn't a book that has a very clear single hero confronting a single enemy. But I do think that if it were to be filmed, this moment when Bella is looking at Jamie and Jamie is reevaluating things would be adrenaline-wise the point that the audience really, really keyed in on it.
Okay. So you're saying it's this part where he's deciding between giving the world, free nuclear power or saving a kaiju.
Yeah, I think that's would be worthy of a crisis.
Okay. I guess Rob is so villainized that I am surprised they even believe that's what he wants to do.
Right.
Because he's not going to do it for free.
No, and they didn't. I don't think. I mean, Rob's, on the one hand, he's a villain and he definitely causes trouble. On the other hand, he's just a slimy creep. He doesn't really feel like he deserves villain status.
Right.
It's kind of pathetic in a certain way.
Oh, yeah. They made him very pathetic. I mean, anyway,
I don't think the story has a clear crisis. Like you could point to any of these events as being the crisis.
Sure.
Given the techniques that we've been looking at.
Right. Oh, then there's a part where the pheromones run out on him. And so that means that Bella's going to chase him. So, but I guess it really comes down to there was a crisis and they protected a kaiju because they are part of the Kaiju Preservation Society.
Yeah.
They successfully protected a kaiju.
Okay.
And that's it. Oh, well, so here's the part. Well, I wrote Act 3, Chasing Down Kaiju. So that was like the difference between this crisis of him having to decide, I guess, having an argument with Rob about whether or not the world needs limitless nuclear power or rather to save a kaiju. But then...
Well, the other thing is we're getting really close to the end. Like this all is happening very close to the end of the book. So we could be moving into the climax stage at this stage.
Right. The climax stage is separate from the crisis. They are right next to each other. It's paragraphs away, but the climax, maybe we shouldn't reveal it.
We'll save it for next time.
Okay.
But right, I think Scalzi definitely has the delayed crisis. We're going all the way up to the end of Act 2, and we're going to bump right into Act 3, and there's just not going to be any downtime. There's no time to go to the tavern or recoup or anything. We're just blazing to the end.
We're just blazing to the end. And that totally can happen. It's part of a stepping stone to the climax. Mm-hmm. The crisis is a stepping stone where shit is already getting real. Look how real it's getting. Oh, you thought it was getting real. Well, here we go. Here's the climax. So it keeps getting up and up and up. Kind of like Neo. He's going into that fight, right? Uh-huh. And he's fighting Mr. Anderson with the skills that he has of Kung Fu or various other skills. But it's not enough. And Mr. Anderson eventually does kill Neo.
Uh-huh.
That's perhaps the crisis.
Right.
But then he comes back.
And we're right back into the fight again.
He goes and kicks his ass. Yeah. One could also argue that the crisis in Matrix was, it's been a while since I've seen the movie. Well, there was that one part where they were on the building and there was the helicopter.
That's a possibility. I think also a crisis is that point where you're really emotionally engaged in the story. So it's a bit of what did you feel was the coolest thing that happened in the book.
That's the climax, isn't it?
Like the climax is also the coolest thing that happens in the book, but I think the crisis needs to be the coolest thing that happens in the book up until that point.
Okay. I think it is wise to just say, dear listener, that trying to pick one moment to be your crisis and one moment to be your climax is probably a mistake.
Especially in a book where you've just got words and words. Maybe in a movie, it's a bit easier to do because you can use the power of the camera to really like slow down something. Or in the case of the Aragon, like you use flashbacks in there to help to put it all together. It's much tighter and you can really point to this thing. Whereas with writing, you just need words, and sometimes you need to describe something. It just takes more pages or more space, and things aren't as close. Like they're happening all at the same time, but the writing in the book is kind of pushing them a little bit apart because you need space to write about stuff.
Yeah, you're going to go into flashbacks. You're going to do various different tricks that they can't do in a movie because there's very different set of expectations. And also remember, most people say that the book is better than the movie. So
only the people that have read the book. Usually they're saying that to somebody who hasn't read the book and has no intention of reading the book, but thinks the movie was really cool.
Yeah. So anyway, I am tired. We did work out and we did this whole episode and I'm very proud of us. And it was quite the ordeal.
She's saying we're tired because we went to an exercise class first, not because reading the chapter was that hard, which it was too, but we did that the previous day.
I'm still tired from it though.
Oh my God, such a long chapter.
Yeah. I had to have a gin and tonic while I read it. I'm just going to say.
If there's something here that's still confusing, go check out Renee's Snark Notes rather than read the chapter. They're going to be more useful, they're going to be more entertaining, and they're going to be shorter.
Yes, there'll be pictures and stuff and examples, good ones. By the way, when are we going to be done with these steps? This is the ordeal. What's coming up?
I think we can do it in 2 more episodes. We go 2 at a time.
So we've got the things coming up are the reward and then the road back.
And then we got resurrection.
But they died, came back already.
And then...
Is that it?
Return with the elixir. So we'll do 2 stages per episode. We'll do an interview workshop episode next week. And then the week after that, we will jump into stage
9, 10, the reward and the other one. All right.
All right.
Whew, we're almost done with the stages. Now, it doesn't mean we're done with the book.
We're going to figure out some way to speed things up on that part.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. Check out our process group. Check out our website and Renee's Snark Notes.
Buy Kim's book.
And if you know another person that's writing and is struggling with trying to figure out how to structure their novel, then recommend our podcast because I think this is actually a really good overview. I am learning stuff about the structure of stories and the structure of screenplays and such by diving into this. Even if it's not necessarily Vogler's writing, he is challenging me to think about this stuff.
I agree. He is giving us ideas. It's actually going to give me skills on how, when I watch a movie, like I'll be able to see exactly what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Or read a book.
Or read a book. Yeah, I'll be able to point things out going, that was the crisis, you know? Oh, that was the mentor. Oh, they're doing mentoring things. Anyway, but I am kind of over it. This book is really long.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll see you next time, dear listener.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Otto. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
I don't want to read the AI overview for reasons